Great, thank you very much for inviting me here. I haven't got any slides, but I'm from the Wellcome Trust. I'm head of communications there. For those of you who don't know the trust, we are by far Britain's largest charity, and we spend £650 million a year on biomedical research. That's more than any other charity worldwide, actually, besides the Gates Foundation. And we are also only just slightly behind the government as the second largest funder of medical research in the UK. Now, 10 years ago, my boss, Mark Woolpert, who's soon to leave us to become Government Chief Scientist, started as director of the Trust. And one of the first things that he wanted to do was to look up some of the recent research that the Trust had funded in peer-reviewed journals, to start to look through it, familiarise himself with that. And he immediately discovered that he had a major problem. From his computer, he went onto the websites of The Lancet, Nature, all the big peer-reviewed journals, and he hit paywalls. Paywall after paywall after paywall. He was finding that although the Wellcome Trust had actually paid for this research out of charitable money, he, as the director of the Wellcome Trust, was unable to read the results of that research without paying for it all over again. And it highlighted something that was really a major problem in the scientific ecosystem, which is this. The vast majority of medical research, indeed all scientific research, is funded either by the taxpayer or by charities such as the Wellcome Trust and Cancer Research UK that we just heard about. The work is done by scientists largely in public institutions, universities. They then submit their findings to a peer-reviewed journal where the peer review, the vetting process that shows that these results are worthwhile, is performed by other scientists for free. The journal then charges university libraries vast sums of money to subscribe to the results. And the result is that the vast majority of academic research is locked away behind these paywalls that greatly limits its value to the community, to the scientific community, to business, and increasingly to actual patients who very often can and want to become very expert in the diseases that they suffer from, and they want to read the primary literature, but very often they can't. This isn't only unfair, it's also not really compatible with the digital age, and it holds back science. It used to be that the subscription model was the least bad way of doing this. There were significant costs in obviously producing a printed magazine or journal. There were also, and there remain, significant costs in actually organising the editing process, the peer review, even if the reviewers themselves aren't paid. But the advent of digital has really created another way of doing that, and that is the open access journal, where it's now possible to have journals that are free for anybody to read, but they of course have to be paid for somehow, and the way in which we do that by and large is through what's known as an article processing charge. So the cost of producing, the cost of publishing research moves from the back end, where it's paid by the reader, to the front end, where it's paid by the author, or more usually by the funders of the author. So under an open access journal system, which is the way in which scientific publishing is increasingly moving, the scientist pays on submission of their paper a fee, typically about £2,000, that's typically picked up by the Wellcome Trust or whoever else is funding them, in order to ensure that the fruits of that research are freely available for anybody to use. And that's terribly important these days, because only if you have that open access system can you really properly start to take advantage, start to take full advantage in science of the many extra tools and added value that digital technology brings. It's really apposite to be following Amy's talk, because the kind of science that she's talking about can be absolutely done on the published results of research, but only if those results are available in an open access way. It's not even good enough for the Elsevier's and Macmillans of this world, the subscription publishers, to be granting access on a piecemeal basis to researchers who want to aggregate very large amounts of data, because the system doesn't scale. Imagine if, as a researcher, you've got to get permission to access this data from 20, 30, 40 different publishers before you can start to do your work. The only way that this actually works is through open access publishing. It's scalable, and very, very importantly, it's future-proof. We may be able to design a system right now that allows for what scientists currently want to do with large amounts of data, but we don't know how scientists are going to want to use published data in 3, 4, certainly 10 years' time, and to design a system around that potentially creates all sorts of hostages to the future. So what are we doing at the Trust about this? Well, we're doing two things. First of all, our scientists have to publish in an open access way. They can do it in two ways. Either we pay the upfront charges so that they can publish in open access journals, or publish in a journal that is traditionally subscription but that has an open access facility. Or in some cases, we will allow our scientists to publish in a subscription journal, so long as that paper is then made freely available within a year. But then the second thing we're doing is we're actually collaborating with two other major international funders of research, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in the US and the Max Planck Society in Germany, to launch a new journal called eLife, which will launch next month. 10th of December is the date to look out for. And what eLife will do is it will actually be a charitably funded, high-ranking journal. It will be a journal that publishes the type of science that you would otherwise expect to see in Nature or the New England Journal of Medicine, but that is entirely open access, and that will make full use of the idea that the data that's actually contained within an academic paper is extraordinarily valuable, perhaps in ways in which the author didn't originally believe or intend. And therefore that data can be pulled out. It can be reused in ways that the scientists perhaps didn't originally predict. That will be charitably funded, at least for the first few years, while we try to find a sustainable business model for it for the long run. There are already very successful business models for open access publishing. The Public Library of Science stable of journals is profitable. The old subscription model is broken. It's broken scientifically, and it isn't really fit for purpose for the digital world. There's a really exciting trend here that I think is going to make science better and more successful in the long run. That's not the only way that we're looking at the Wellcome Trust to exploit digital. We're also starting to explore the wider science communication ecosystem, the wider media ecosystem indeed, looking at what perhaps isn't done well in traditional media and seeing where charitable organizations may be able to take advantage of digital tools in order to to improve communication of science. But open access is something that is happening now. It couldn't happen without digital, and it will enable us in science to make a full use of the promise of digital technology to improve scientific research. I'll leave it there and thank you, and I'll gladly answer any questions.